on Syria.
I also wish to report here that the challenges of hate speech continue, and that we have begun engaging with the government and others on possible approaches to this issue. Mr. President, I was pleased to meet recently with a group of Syrian women from Idlib working on development. They emphasized that women's meaningful participation in public life is necessary for strengthening social cohesion and supporting Syria's recovery. They expressed support for special measures aimed at enhancing women's representation, welcomed the government's efforts to strengthen women's leadership capacity, and expressed hope for a national framework to support women's empowerment. I also value the opportunity to brief on 30 April the Council's informal expert group on women, peace and security, where members emphasized the importance of women's economic empowerment and meaningful participation in legislative and transitional justice frameworks. Members also called for action to support measures by the government to prosecute perpetrators of violence against women and girls. Mr. President, economic hardship has fueled protest and criticism in many parts of the country. Syrians continue to face high prices, reduced purchasing power, significant increase in the cost of electricity, and uneven access to basic services, while ongoing regional tensions further disrupt trade flows and energy supplies. Humanitarian needs remain severe and the response is underfunded, as USG Fletcher will brief you. Food insecurity persists, explosive ordnance continues to kill and injure, and degraded services make returns fragile. As I told ministers in my last visit, we support the efforts of the government to attract investment and nurture opportunities for business. Confidence in Syria's prospects for recovery and reconstruction are constrained by remaining sanctions and the long-term economic and institutional legacy of former sanctions. It is important to urgently overcome such hindrances to investment and financial flaws. Earlier this week, together with the UN Resident Humanitarian Coordinator and other UN colleagues, I attended the Syria Partnership Coordination Forum in Brussels, hosted by the European Commission and the Syrian government. Participants expressed a shared desire to contribute actively to sustain and coordinated engagement in support of Syria's priorities for economic recovery. The United Nations is ready to play its part in these efforts. To conclude, Mr. President, I return to Damascus next week, to advance discussions on the transition and my office's role in supporting it. I hope to reach soon an understanding with the government on broad areas of cooperation, building on proposals made in March and valuable discussions since, as well as on the relocation of our Geneva-based staff to Damascus. We're keen to move forward expeditiously and constructively in support of Syria, in line with the Council's expectations and Syria's national priorities. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Cordone for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Tom Fletcher.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you to the Deputy Special Envoy for his briefing. As I briefed you last month, Syria is at a critical yet promising moment. We must consolidate humanitarian gains and invest in recovery. I'll cover 3 points today. Firstly, progress is real, but fragile. Violence has decreased, sanctions have eased, humanitarian access has improved. Returns of refugees and internally displaced people are increasing. But funding is still falling faster than needs. And if recovery is delayed, it will end up costing more lives and more money. Humanitarian needs remain significant. About 2/3 of the population, over 15 million people, most of them women, girls and children, require help this year. We prioritize women, girls, and children in all our humanitarian action because they are so often on the front line of these crises. But current funding levels mean we will only reach about half of those in need. Large-scale returns to Syria are a very positive sign of change, but they are also increasing pressure on already limited services, housing, livelihoods, and infrastructure. And pressure on the humanitarian response continues to rise. More than 390,000 people have crossed the border from Lebanon since early March. That's 90,000 since we briefed you a month ago. More than 80% of those arrivals are Syrian, and more than 86,000 have indicated an intention to stay permanently. Many need some level of support. At the same time, the prolonged closure of the Straits of Hormuz means that the cost of food and fuel is rising, with immediate consequences for communities already on the edge. Diesel is up 17%, electricity by several 100% in some areas, and while subsidized bread prices remain unchanged, the loaves are 12% smaller. And flooding continues, notably in the north, where 13,000 people have been affected since late April, along with damage to roads, bridges, and farming land and livestock. So, predictable and flexible humanitarian funding is essential to reach more people and make full use of improved access that we now have to many areas. I thank the donors who are stepping up to support the hyper-prioritized Syrian appeal, led by the US with $160 million, the EU with $63 million, and Japan with $42 million. However, almost halfway through the year, the humanitarian appeal still sits at barely more than 16% funded, with only $480 million received against the $2.9 billion needed. Almost 90% of the money received comes from the US, the Europeans, Japan, and Canada. We are ready to receive funding from the rest of the world. Just this week, the impact of the funding shortages was stark. The World Food Programme has been forced to reduce its emergency food assistance by 50%, from reaching 1.3 million people to reaching 650,000. And also it has had to halt its nationwide bread subsidy program that has supported millions each day. In the health system, we see the tension between progress and fragility. Over the past month, nearly 800,000 children under 5 received essential vaccinations, including polio. But at the same time, serious public health risks persist. Leishmaniasis cases have risen sharply this year in Aleppo. Nearly 150 measles cases were reported in the first 4 months of this year. Hepatitis A cases have also increased. And these trends reflect limited health services in many areas and the ongoing risks from unsafe water and sanitation. Here, as elsewhere, when we are supported, we deliver. The UN and NGO partners, in cooperation with the Syrian government, have reached communities across the country, including improving access to clean water for more than 3 million people, many in camps and displacement centers, and more than 2.2 million health interventions. For the people of Syria, the second tranche allocation announced yesterday by the US means further funding and support, allowing more partners to save more lives. And this will be on top of the current work of the Syria Humanitarian Fund that has allocated $145 million to life-saving interventions this year for communities most in need. Mr. President, a second point, investing in recovery is essential for stabilization. Over 3.4 million people in Syria returned in 2025, and that trend continues. More than 315,000 refugees returned in the first 4 months this year, and I expect returns to rise over the summer once the school year has ended. Higher returns, greater institutional stability, improved humanitarian access create a real opportunity to move beyond the long-standing emergency humanitarian response. As President al-Sharaa stressed in Damascus last month, demining and protection remain paramount. Unexploded ordnance remains a major threat, a key barrier to safe returns and economic recovery. It continues to kill and maim people across Syria. Since just 22nd of April, explosive ordnance has killed 15 people, including 5 children, and injured 37, including 14 children. And farming and raising cattle is especially dangerous. This is why the government of Syria has identified a no-mines policy as a key pillar of its forward agenda, and we support this goal. Mr. President, nearly 80% of respondents to a nationwide survey said they were aware of gender-based violence incidents in their communities, most commonly domestic violence. Psychological abuse and early marriage also remain common, and delays or gaps in services can have fatal consequences. Child protection risks also remain acute. 1 in 5 respondents to our recent survey across nearly half of assessed communities reported risks, including violence, neglect, child labor, and early and forced marriage. And many people in Syria report needing civil documentation and support to resolve housing, land, and property issues, major obstacles to sustainable returns, and drivers of social tension and exclusion. Mr. President, my third final point, the government of Syria's priorities are clear. The no tents and no camps vision provides a framework for collective action, helping Syria move from prolonged humanitarian response to sustainable, nationally owned solutions. The resident and humanitarian coordinator in Syria, Ms. Nathalie Fustier, visited Aleppo and Idlib last week with representatives of the government of Syria and UN agencies to meet communities and partners engaged in progressing this important no camps and no mines initiative. And the UN stands ready to support that vision through the humanitarian needs and response plan, which I launched with the government of Syria and the administrator of UNDP in Damascus just a few weeks ago. Mr. President, globally, the humanitarian community faces an increasingly daunting set of challenges. But we have a plan, prioritized, collective, efficient, to reach 87 million people with life-saving support this year. And it is working. We've reached 14.4 million people already. And our courageous colleagues are out there right now reaching more, one life at a time. And we're making all the tracking of that funding and the outcomes available to the public. Radical transparency to ensure that we hold our teams, ourselves, our donors, and our partners to account for the results. And we're determined that alongside the government of Syria, Syria becomes an example of the best measure of humanitarian effort working, which is that we are no longer needed, that we no longer need to have Security Council briefings on Syria. And I believe Syria will and can continue to defy the odds, the history, the challenges, and many people's expectations. If the international community makes the right choices, the Syrian people can hope for enduring security, justice, and opportunity. But if we fail to fund the completion of the humanitarian mission and an effective transition to Syrian-led recovery and stability, today's gaps risk becoming tomorrow's irreversible crises. My 3 asks: back the mission, fund the prioritized plan to remove remaining humanitarian needs. 2, back the transition by rebuilding infrastructure, economic opportunity, and hope. And 3, stay the course. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Fletcher for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Deputy Special Envoy Condone and Under Secretary General Fletcher for their briefings. Mr. President, last month this Council stood united in recognizing Syria's efforts to avoid direct involvement in the broader regional conflict. It's crucial to remain focused on this. It also requires that regional actors respect Syria's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. We must allow Syria to focus on the immense challenges ahead for the political and societal transition to a peaceful and just new Syria. Today, I will make 3 points in this regard. First, we acknowledge the recent historical steps taken on transitional justice. The transitional government's commitment to an independent, credible, and transparent Syrian-led process is of vital importance. Syria has an opportunity to break with decades of impunity for atrocity crimes, to bring perpetrators to justice, not only to ensure justice for victims, but also to prevent and deter future violations and to pave the way for reconciliation and lasting peace. We stress that the fight for justice must be rooted in human rights. This includes addressing grave violations committed by all perpetrators, regardless of political affiliation, and to give all victims access to justice. We urge Syria's authorities to embrace a genuinely victim-centered process. Denmark remains concerned that a comprehensive legal framework for transparent and inclusive transitional justice has yet to be adopted. As a result, current efforts risk violating due process guarantees and may fall short of international standards. We therefore call for the swift adoption and effective implementation of relevant legislation in consultation with civil society and international partners. Second, Mr. President, the full appointment of the People's Assembly must be concluded without delay. We welcome recent steps taken towards facilitating elections in northeast Syria, including the establishment of judicial panels in several constituencies. And we hope to see similar progress on the election of candidates from Sueda when possible, as well as appointments of the last one-third of members of the Assembly by the President al-Shara in the near future. Denmark underscores once again that the rich diversity of Syria must be thoroughly represented in the final composition of the People's Assembly. We reiterate the call for an inclusive political process and for the full, equal and meaningful participation and representation of women. Third, humanitarian assistance must be sustained in parallel to initiating recovery and reconstruction efforts where possible. While the recent closure of the cross-border operation from Turkey is a testimony to how far Syria has come since the fall of the Assad regime, it does not mean that we can decrease our focus on responding to the humanitarian needs of the Syrian people. As highlighted by the USG, millions of people are caught in poverty and remain dependent on humanitarian aid. Therefore, funding must be sustained and access must continuously be secured. Simultaneously, the lifting of most sanctions and the re-establishment of trade relations open the door to renewed investments, a crucial step towards rebuilding Syria's economy. This will enable the sustainable return and reintegration of refugees and IDPs and end dependence on humanitarian aid. The full restoration of the EU-Syria cooperation agreement announced this week is a part of this important progress. Mr. President, in closing, for the first time in far too long, many Syrians are allowing themselves to hope for a safer and more stable future. The international community must help transform that hope into lasting reality through continued support, cooperation, and commitment to peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we wish to thank Claudio Cardone and Tom Fletcher for their briefings on the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic. The humanitarian needs of the Syrian population remain colossal. We have in recent months seen significant increases in prices for wheat, flour, fuel, and plant oil, and this is particularly affecting the most vulnerable population groups. The normalization of the situation in the area of food security is obstructed by the droughts and related crop losses, as well as the contamination of farming lands with explosive ordinances, as well as the ongoing instability throughout the entire region and directly in Syria. We are particularly concerned by the state of healthcare, water deliveries, and sanitation. According to WHO reports, nearly 15.8 million people need urgent medical assistance at a time when the system is encountering shortages of medicines, equipment, and personnel. At the same time, more than half of water delivery infrastructure and approximately 70% of purification systems have been significantly damaged. A legitimate consequence of this has been the recent hepatitis A outbreaks in Deraa, Hama, and Latakia. In this connection, we view as timely the allocation by the World Bank through the International Development Association in April, their disbursement of $225 million through grants for rebuilding water provision and healthcare facilities in Syria. We expect that these projects will benefit approximately 4.5 million people. This is precisely the kind of practical investment that the country needs today. We welcome the incremental rebuilding of the logistics networks in Syria. Ports are operating. Airports in Damascus and Aleppo are also operating, although cargo capabilities have been limited, and railway infrastructure rebuilding is under discussion. The Syrian authorities have announced the creation and expansion of a number of border crossings with Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. In this context, we take note of the termination on 31 December 2025 of the UN cross-border humanitarian operations from Turkey to Syria, and the transition to the use of regular, including commercial, delivery channels. This is the right and long overdue step. Assistance to the entire territory of the country needs to be delivered in coordination with the Syrian authorities without parallel mechanisms nor alternative structures, in accordance with the guiding principles which are enshrined and secured in General Assembly Resolution 46/182. We also view as beneficial the recent visit to Damascus of the OCHA donor support group. We trust that this will help international partners to see the real picture and to better link humanitarian response to early recovery, development in accordance with the priorities as set out by the Syrian authorities. These include healthcare, education, water deliveries, and energy. Syria needs to transition from operating in emergency mode to the rebuilding of basic services, relaunching the economy, and building the basis for normal life without politicization nor conditions imposed from abroad. This is the only approach that will help not just to manage the crisis, but will help Syria to extricate itself from the crisis. Mr. President, I now turn to political aspects of the Syrian question. The United States and Israel have unleashed a war against Iran, and this has incurred devastating consequences to the entire Middle East, affecting all countries in the region to one degree or another. Syria is no exception. Over Syrian skies during the period of active hostilities, munitions flew, and Syrian-occupied territory by Israel was used by Israel as a staging ground to mount attacks against the sovereign territory of Lebanon under the pretext of combating Hezbollah. We value the political statesmanship of the Syrian leadership. They have avoided becoming dragged into the conflicts that have been provoked by the U.S.-Israeli aggression. In this context, we wish to highlight the further reinforcement of Lebanese-Syrian relations, and this plays an important role in stabilizing the situation in that part of the region. Unfortunately, the same cannot be stated vis-à-vis the conduct of West Jerusalem, which continues to tread the path of debilitating its neighbors through direct military intervention in creation of buffer zones. This is a short-sighted policy, for instead of strengthening its own security, Israel gets a hostilely disposed neighborhood and in an area of perpetual chaos. Achievement of long-term greater security is only possible through political diplomatic means. We condemn Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights. We demand the immediate withdrawal of Israeli troops from Syria. We reaffirm our staunch support for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and independence of the fraternal Syrian Arab Republic. We take note of Damascus' successes in bringing the northeast of Syria back into a single legal fold, and we take note of the Syrian authorities' steps undertaken for the reintegration, upholding the rights of the people in that region. The cultural and the religious diversity of Syria requires that the rights of all ethno-sectarian groups be upheld at the practical level at all levels. And we trust that the inclusive political process will be pursued, a process that is Syrian-led, Syrian-owned, with support from the United Nations and in accordance with the key provisions of Security Council Resolution 2254. We extend our support for the operations of the Office of the Secretary General Special Envoy in Syria and we highlight the importance of establishing cooperation between the UN and Damascus on the basis of national priorities of the host state. Furthermore, we welcome the efforts of the Syrian authorities to combat terrorism. We emphasize our uncompromising position vis-à-vis foreign terrorist fighters whose ideology is incompatible with the ideals that have been proclaimed by the new Syrian authorities. Mr. President, the Russian Federation intends to continue to develop multifaceted cooperation with Syria, rooted in traditions of long-standing friendship and mutual respect. We believe that the Syrian people, who have endured a fair share of suffering, will emerge stronger and more robust. For our part, we stand ready to deliver all support to the Syrian authorities and people. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to Deputy Special Envoy Cordone and Undersecretary Fletcher for their briefings. President Trump and the United States stand with the Syrian people in supporting real transitional justice and the rule of law in Syria. Syria's recent arrests of Assad regime members who are alleged to have committed atrocities against Syrian civilians represents a powerful step away from impunity and toward accountability. The United States stands in solidarity with the millions of survivors of Assad's brutality. We therefore urge the Syrian government to take advantage of the resources and expertise offered by international partners who stand ready to assist Syria with its justice and accountability efforts, including the UN's international, impartial, and independent mechanism. We also know that hundreds of thousands of Syrian families, along with several American ones, are still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. To move on and truly begin Syria's recovery, Syrians need closure. Institutions like the Independent Institution on Missing Persons have valuable expertise, and we encourage close partnership between the Syrian government and international partners to get answers for the families of the missing. We urge UN member states to continue to support both these international institutions and the Syrian government as they pursue accountability and transitional justice. The United States also salutes Syria's ongoing campaign to disrupt terrorist networks and criminal gangs. The Assad regime enabled or turned a blind eye to Hezbollah and Captagon cartels, allowing them to sow destruction across Syria and the wider region. By contrast, the new government has disrupted Hezbollah plots, seized drug shipments, and worked with Jordan and Lebanon to stop cross-border crime. We are pleased to work with Syria as a full member of the global coalition to defeat ISIS. The Syrian government is working with the UN and others to rehabilitate, return, and reintegrate ISIS-affiliated populations from northeast Syria to communities of origin. Countries whose nationals remain should contact the Syrian authorities regarding these individuals. Much remains to be done, as evidenced by the troubling May 1st assassination of a Shia cleric near Damascus. We thus encourage member states to support and cooperate with Syrian law enforcement, whether through information sharing or capacity building. We also look forward to the side event at the upcoming UN Counterterrorism High-Level Week, co-organized by UNOCT, EU, and Syria on Syria's approach to countering ISIS. Finally, the United States welcomes Deputy Special Envoy Cordona's recent visit to Syria and appreciates the constructive engagement between his team and Syrian officials. We also support the UN Office of the Special Envoy relocating as soon as possible to Damascus, where it can best support the Syrian government and people. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. Now I'll give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking Deputy Special Envoy Cordone and Undersecretary General Fletcher for their briefing today. And I welcome the participation of the representatives of Syria, Turkey, and Libya at our meeting. I'll make 3 points. First,
We welcome the progress on Syria's political transition, including the start of legal proceedings against former Assad regime figures. These individuals committed heinous crimes. Their trials are a powerful step towards accountability and justice, and we will continue to support the Syrian government in their efforts to uphold the rule of law for all Syria. Of course, there's more work to be done to fully deliver an inclusive political transition. We encourage continued efforts to integrate northeast Syria into unified state structures. We also note that women remain underrepresented across Syria's political and security institutions. We encourage this Council's continued focus on the Women, Peace and Security agenda to support Syria in addressing this vital aspect of the transition. Second, the UK offers our appreciation to the UN and all partners involved in the cross-border and aid operations from Turkey into Syria over the last 11 years. In that time, over 65,000 operations provided vital humanitarian support to communities across northern Syria. We welcome the operation's successful conclusion and a shift to a more sustainable commercial method. However, as we've heard today, the humanitarian situation remains challenging, with 15.6 million people still in need. So it is vital that humanitarian partners continue to enjoy unfettered access and a permissive operating environment. Third, we welcome Syria's firm commitment to peaceful coexistence with its neighbours. Still, the situation in the region remains volatile, with risks to Syria's stability and economic recovery. De-escalation and dialogue are more important than ever, and we urge a return to direct talks between Syria and Israel with the objective of supporting long-term peace. President, the UN can play a vital role in supporting Syria's reconstruction and stability. We look forward to the timely move of the Special Envoy's office to Damascus. The UK will continue to work with the UN, this Council and the wider international community, alongside the Syrian government, to deliver a more peaceful and prosperous future for the Syrian people. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of France.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to welcome the presence among us of the representative of Syria, the representative of Turkey, and the representative of Libya. And I also wish to thank the Deputy Special Envoy, Mr. Claudio Cordone, as well as the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher, for their briefings, which deliver a clear message that the situation is improving. Our support, nevertheless, remains indispensable given the magnitude of the challenges. A number of positive developments have taken place since our last debate, and they reflect the fact that the transition strategy that has been initiated by the Syrian authorities has been generating results. France applauds the opening of trials against figures of the former regime, the transitional justice and fighting against impunity for all crimes perpetrated on Syrian soil, whether they were perpetrated in the past or present, are of significant importance given the wounds endured by the Syrian people. Turning to the economic front, we've shouldered our responsibility, and France welcomes the restoration of the cooperation agreement between the European Union and Syria, the purpose of which is to facilitate Syria's full reintegration into the international economic system. EU-Syria dialogue has also facilitated the announcement of the package of 620 million euros over a period of 3 years to support recovery in Syria. In parallel, the unveiling of the re-engagement program of the World Bank in Syria is a milestone in the transition from a humanitarian assistance model to a lasting economic development model, which is attractive for investment. ongoing dismantling of the chemical program, which was inherited from the Syrian former regime. Progress in this is welcome, and the drug issues that are being addressed are also welcome. In addition, the return of nearly 2 million refugees once again demonstrates the fact that Syria once again is offering prospects and hope for the future for its citizens. Yet, the Security Council and the international community need to remain vigilant to see to it that the path towards reconciliation and recovery of Syria is indeed the path that is being tread by that country in the spirit of the 29 January last agreement between the Syrian Democratic Forces and the Damascus government. France welcomes full implementation thereof. And in the spirit of that agreement, we call for consolidation of unity of Syria on all of its territory in a manner that respects the civil and cultural rights of all population and society groups and the safe return of displaced persons. More generally speaking, we support all reconstruction efforts to build a democratic, pluralistic political system, as well as the decision taken in order to provide for treatment for wounds of the past and to help improve relations between communities. We support the full representation and participation of women in public life. We will continue unstintingly to fight against terrorism perpetrated by Daesh through greater cooperation with the international coalition. Enhancement of Syrian border security remains a priority in order to combat against the trafficking and to contribute to enhancement of the sovereignty of states in the region, as well as to shore up the new partnership between Lebanon and Syria, which we welcome and which we encourage. We also call upon Israel to cease its incursions into Syrian territory, which are liable to jeopardize the stabilization of Syria. And lastly, we invite Syrian authorities to confirm a cooperation axes, and this can help to build a renewed partnership with the United Nations. The presence of the Office of the Special Envoy in Damascus in close proximity to the needs is timely. Mr. President, notwithstanding the regional instability and military escalation along its borders, Syria is continuing to advance its political transition. This is grounds for hope for the entire region, and we wish to encourage Syria as it moves towards a future of peace, stability, and prosperity. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France. Now I give the floor to the representative of Colombia.
I thank the Presidency for convening this meeting. I also thank Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Mr. Claudio Cordone, and Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs. I thank them both for their briefings. Moreover, I welcome to this meeting the Permanent Representative of Syria and the other representatives with us today. President, Colombia today wishes to make 4 points. Firstly, the political process in Syria must forge ahead guided by inclusion, representativeness, and it must focus on rebuilding public trust. In accordance with Resolution 2254 of 2015, a sustainable political solution requires legitimate institutions, broad-based participation, and conditions which can mend the social fabric that for years has been frayed. That process must be led by Syria for the Syrian people with the constructive support of the international community and with full respect for the sovereignty, political independence, unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations. With this premise in mind, my delegation values the recent progress made designed to bolster the capacities of the Syrian state as well as to buttress its institutions and to promote the country's gradual reintegration into fora for both economic and diplomatic cooperation. In particular, we take note of actions designed to create conditions for economic recovery, resource mobilization, the provision of core services, and demining. Moreover, Colombia recognizes efforts made in the area of justice on the understanding that the investigation of crimes committed during the conflict is crucial to heed the legitimate demands of the victims. to shed light on events and lay more robust foundations for national reconciliation, truth and reparation. These are crucial components of transitional justice. In this same vein, it is vital that the United Nations support continues for the Syrian political process. Colombia expresses its support for the role of the Special Envoy and for the relevant mechanisms of the organization, in particular its efforts to promote a broad-based dialogue and to support the implementation of the commitments which remain unfulfilled. Secondly, the humanitarian track remains inextricable from the viability of the political process. In Syria, 15.6 million people require humanitarian assistance. At the same time, high levels of internal displacement persist, and we're seeing an increase in the returns of displaced persons and refugees. This reality confirms that institutional recovery and the country's stabilization cannot make sustainable progress if, at the same time, we do not heed the most pressing humanitarian needs. Against this backdrop, returns must be safe, dignified, voluntary and sustainable. Since the end of February 2026, more than 300,000 people have crossed over from Lebanon into Syria. These movements are taking place in an environment marked by increasing poverty, food insecurity, and the need for effective access to basic services. Consequently, the international community must provide the necessary support to facilitate orderly returns, to avoid hasty processes which increase pressure on host communities, and ensure that returned persons can rebuild their lives in a safe and dignified fashion. My third point, my delegation condemns the acts perpetrated by the self-titled Islamic State, a group which continues to constitute a threat to peace, security and stability in Syria and the region. Finally, Colombia reiterates that Syria's stability must be built on inclusion, as well as on protection and the full respect for the country's sovereignty, political independence, unity and territorial integrity. We repudiate once again any and all occupation of Syrian territory, and we urge the full implementation of the relevant resolutions of this Council. It is only on this basis that it will be possible to build a sustainable peace, able to meet the immediate needs of the people, and to support a national recovery which is inclusive, legitimate and lasting. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Colombia for their statement. Now I give the floor to the representative of Liberia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, and my own country, Liberia. We thank Deputy Special Envoy Mr. Cordone and USG Mr. Fletcher for their comprehensive briefings. We also welcome the participation of the Permanent Representative of Syria and other distinguished representatives in today's meeting. Mr. President, the A3 recognizes that Syria remains at a delicate juncture as it continues to navigate complex political, security, humanitarian, and economic challenges amid evolving regional dynamics. Recent regional developments have once again demonstrated the extent to which Syria remains vulnerable to broader regional instability and external tensions. We reaffirm that a credible, inclusive, Syrian-led and Syrian-owned political process in line with Security Council Resolution 2254 remains the only viable pathway toward achieving sustainable peace and long-term stability. In this regard, the A3 would like to highlight the following points. First, the A3 reiterates its unwavering commitment to the sovereignty independence, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria. We reaffirm that all actions and engagements concerning Syria must fully respect the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and relevant Security Council resolutions. In this regard, the A3 commends Syria's efforts to avoid being drawn into the regional conflicts, and we underscore the importance of preserving Syria's stability. We encourage continued engagement aimed at de-escalation, dialogue, and the promotion of regional stability. Second, we underscore the importance of advancing an inclusive political process that reflects the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people. We note ongoing diplomatic engagement and efforts by regional and international actors aimed at supporting stabilization and fostering dialogue. In this regard, confidence-building measures, national reconciliation efforts, and inclusive governance structures remain essential to rebuilding trust and advancing a durable political settlement. We commend the Syrian government's efforts and encourage continued constructive engagement by all stakeholders in support of a peaceful and stable future for Syria. Third, the A3 expresses deep concern regarding the humanitarian situation, which remains dire, as we've heard from the USG. Millions of Syrians continue to require humanitarian assistance, while economic deterioration, displacement, food insecurity, damaged infrastructure, and limited access to essential services continue to place immense pressure on civilians. In this context, we call upon the international community and donors to scale up their contributions to the humanitarian fund for Syria to match the increasing scale of this crisis. We further emphasize the need to strengthen early recovery initiatives and rehabilitation efforts aimed at restoring basic services, supporting livelihoods, and creating conditions conducive to the voluntary, safe, dignified, and sustainable return of refugees and internally displaced persons. As communities begin to return, the risks they face do not diminish. Although large-scale hostilities have subsided, as we've heard, explosive remnants of war continue to endanger civilians, especially children's lives. And that is every day. We therefore call for scaled-up risk education, accelerated clearance of affected areas, and sustained support for survivors. Sustainable peace cannot take hold in communities that remain unsafe. Fourth, the A3 is deeply concerned by the continued reports of military operations against targets inside Syrian territories, including repeated military attacks. Such actions risk further destabilizing an already fragile environment and threaten regional peace and security. We reiterate that the occupied Syrian Golan remains an integral part of Syria, in accordance with Resolution 497, and we call for a complete withdrawal from all Syrian territories. We urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint and avoid actions that could lead to further escalation. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Syrian people have endured over a decade of conflict, displacement, and hardship. The A3 reaffirms its full solidarity with the Syrian people and reiterates its commitment to supporting efforts aimed at achieving lasting peace, stability, and prosperity in Syria. We call on this Council and the wider international community to remain united and actively engaged in supporting Syria's path toward peace and stability through dialogue, cooperation, and respect for Syria's sovereignty and territorial integrity. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the representative of Liberia. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
President, thanks to Deputy Special Envoy Claudio Cordone and Under Secretary General Tom Fletcher for their briefings. And I would also like to welcome the presence of the distinguished representative of Syria, Turkey and Libya in today's meeting. President, UN's continued engagement with Syria is important for building confidence and trust and for supporting a Syrian-owned and Syrian-led political process. We appreciate the responsible approach of the Syrian government in seeking to insulate Syria from the destabilizing effects of the wider regional developments at this particularly critical stage of the country's transition and recovery. We are impressed by the great strides that the brotherly people of Syria have made in this journey. A growing number of Syrians are returning to their homes. According to UN estimates, more than 3 million Syrians, including internally displaced persons and refugees from abroad, have returned since late 2024. This reflects renewed trust and is an inspiring sign of hope for the future. There are also positive developments on the accountability and transitional justice front, including the development by the National Commission of a draft transitional justice law. These important steps towards national reconciliation and healing, firmly grounded in due process, are essential for durable peace. The political transition process continues to register gradual yet significant progress. We welcome the efforts aimed at advancing institutional arrangements. We hope that the recent developments in northeast Syria will advance in an inclusive manner, including through the completion of the People's Assembly as part of the broader transitional framework. A credible, inclusive, and Syrian-owned political transition remains essential for long-term peace, stability, and unity. We also note that terrorist activities in parts of Syria remain a serious threat to the country's stability and regional security. It requires sustained and coordinated counterterrorism efforts to curb the threats posed by ISIL, Daesh, and other terrorist groups operating in Syria, as well as the presence of foreign terrorist fighters. President, the continued Israeli incursions and violations of Syrian sovereignty and territorial integrity, including the occupation of positions in the area of separation, are condemnable and unacceptable. These actions violate international law and relevant Security Council resolutions and risk further destabilizing an already fragile regional environment. The Council must ensure that its resolutions 338 and 497, as well as the 1974 disengagement agreement, are fully respected. The sequential lifting of sanctions presents an important opportunity for Syria's economic recovery, reconstruction, and reintegration into regional and global economy. These openings must translate into tangible and sustained benefit for the Syrian people. The growing economic engagement and investment initiatives by a number of regional countries, as well as the European Council's restoration of fuller trade ties with Syria, are important developments. President, sustained international support and coordination are also critical for addressing the continuing humanitarian situation in Syria at scale and commensurate to the staggering needs that were outlined by USG Fletcher also in his briefing. The international community must step up to fill the funding gap. To conclude, Mr. President, Pakistan reaffirms its full support to the government and people of Syria on their remarkable and commendable journey towards ushering a new era of peace, stability, and prosperity in the country. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Bahrain.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to welcome Mr. Claudio Cordone, Deputy Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General for the Syrian Arab Republic, and Mr. Tom Fletcher, Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. I thank them both for the valuable information and important assessments contained in their briefings on the situation in Syria. I also welcome the participation of the permanent representative of the sisterly Syrian Arab Republic in today's session, as well as the permanent representatives of Libya and Turkey. In light of the important political, security, and humanitarian developments in Syria, we stress our support to every effort to promote security and stability in Syria and preserve its sovereignty and unity, thereby contributing to regional and international security and stability. Allow me to focus on the following points today. 1. The Kingdom of Bahrain reaffirms its support to the sovereignty, unity and independence of the Syrian Arab Republic. We reject all forms of intervention in its internal affairs and stress the need to preserve security, stability and state institutions in Syria to achieve the aspirations of the brethren Syrian people. 2. We commend the government's efforts to maintain security and stability and shield the country from the regional escalation. We also commend its continuous efforts to fight terrorism and arms and drug trafficking and counter attempts at destabilizing the country, thereby promoting national peace and security and promoting Syria's unity. 3. The Kingdom of Bahrain welcomes the efforts undertaken by the Syrian government during the transitional phase, including promoting Syria's positive engagement regionally and internationally and supporting national reconciliation efforts among all Syrian components, specifically through the implementation of the roadmap in Al-Suwaida and the continued implementation of the National Integration Agreement with the Syrian Democratic Forces, thereby reinforcing the unity and stability of the state and safeguarding its achievements. 4. We stress the need for supporting and assisting the Syrian government in its efforts to achieve recovery and reconstruction. In this context, we welcome investments as well as economic and development initiatives from sisterly and friendly nations aimed at bolstering the Syrian economy and fostering the development and prosperity of the brotherly Syrian people. We commend the decision by the Council of the European Union on May 11, 2026 to terminate the partial suspension of the cooperation agreement between the European Union and Syria and resume the full implementation of this agreement. This is a significant international development that reflects support for the re-engagement with Syria and its economic recovery. We also call upon Member States and the international community to continue promoting economic and investment cooperation with Syria, thereby accelerating economic recovery. 5. We once again reject all practices that infringe upon the sovereignty, unity and territorial integrity of Syria or that threaten its security and stability. We stress the need for Israel to withdraw from the occupied Syrian territories, including the Golan, and urge full adherence to the 1974 disengagement agreement, as well as respect for relevant resolutions of international legitimacy. 6. We welcome the progress made with regard to the return of Syrian refugees and displaced persons to their homes. We commend the efforts made to ensure a conducive environment for a safe, voluntary and dignified return. We note that according to the UNHCR, more than 1.6 million Syrians have returned to Syria since December 8, 2024. We stress our support for the efforts of the United Nations, including those of UNHCR and international partners in this regard. This support facilitates the return of refugees and ensures the continued provision of necessary humanitarian and development assistance to the brotherly Syrian people. In conclusion, the Kingdom of Bahrain reiterates its steadfast position in support of all measures aimed at enhancing the security and stability of the brotherly Syrian Arab Republic and at fulfilling the aspirations of its people for security, development and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Bahrain for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. We are grateful for the briefings from Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Mr. Claudio Cordone, and from the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Tom Fletcher. Moreover, we wish to warmly welcome the representatives of the Syrian Arab Republic, Turkey and Libya, who honor us today with their presence. Mr. President, Syria has shown important progress in the political transition since December 2024. However, reconstruction, reconciliation and stabilization remain present as challenges which require both regional and international support so that finally peace can prevail across the full extent of its territory and so that hundreds of thousands of displaced people can continue their path of return home. Against this backdrop, as we have repeated on several occasions, we underscore the efforts made by authorities to shield Syria from the regional dynamics of the conflicts. At times when divisive rhetoric and the proliferation of misinformation and hate speech on social media and in other media can cause the already delicate Syrian social fabric to further fray, decisive political will is vital for Syria to continue to grow stronger. With this in mind, we reiterate our concern at the increasing number of incidents reported in the zone of separation established by the Separation of Forces Agreement of 1974. Moreover, we are of the view that Resolution 2254 must continue to serve as a point of reference to ensure that national cohesion remains the lodestar of all relevant sectors in Syria. Panama wishes to reaffirm its commitment to the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of Syria. Regarding the political participation, we believe it vital that the protection and full, effective and meaningful participation of women be incorporated into all efforts related to the transition, as well as into governance structures, and it must be borne in mind when remaining appointments to the People's Assembly are made. Moreover, we are closely following efforts designed to ensure the integration of the SDF and the integration of administrative structures in the northeast international institutions on the rule of law. Panama is of the view that it is particularly important that gradual but resolute progress be made in terms of transitional justice and accountability. We have borne witness to the fact that transitional justice across various files of this council, such as for example in Colombia, which might be in different regions and contexts, this transitional justice has nevertheless been successful in bringing a society towards reconciliation, bringing justice to victims, and in assisting them in confronting bitterly tough post-conflict realities. Consequently, we're of the view that the strengthening of legitimate and credible institutions requires independent mechanisms of inquiries, as well as processes which guarantee justice, which combat impunity, and which serve to prevent new violations. We take note of the recent reports of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry and of national efforts designed to shed light on violent incidents which occurred in El Sueda. This must be a priority to prevent other acts of sectarian violence. We also recognize the importance of continuing to strengthen national capacity to tackle the persistent threat to stability posed by ISIL, Daesh, and other foreign terrorist fighters. President, to conclude, Panama wishes to underscore developments seen in humanitarian assistance and recovery, as we heard from the reports delivered today. We laud efforts made by the UN system and by international partners to make progress towards better integration of both immediate humanitarian assistance and strategies focused on recovery and resilience. We also hail joint efforts made by the government and the UN to facilitate the timely establishment of the office and team of the Special Envoy in Damascus. We are particularly optimistic to note the coordinated work done by OCHA and UNDP on the ground, because where humanitarian work ends, space must be created for sustainable development that is comprehensive in nature. This work helps to lay foundations so that the efforts of the government enjoy the necessary support to make progress. As such, we underscore efforts made by the government to champion economic recovery and to promote investment in sectors such as energy, infrastructure, tourism and transport, with broad-based cooperation with partners such as Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Turkey and Egypt. The magnitude of the tragedy hitherto endured by the Syrian people demands the constructive commitment of the international community, so that, with the support of the United Nations, Syria is able to transform decades of tragedy into a story of recovery and hope. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Latvia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me first thank Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Claudio Cordone, and the Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher for their briefings. And I welcome the participation of the permanent representative of the Syrian Arab Republic and representatives from Turkey and Libya to today's meeting. The ongoing engagement between the UN and the Syrian transitional government is encouraging, and we are hopeful that Mr. Cordone's upcoming visit to Damascus next week will be productive, including on relocation of the Special Envoy's office in the nearest future. Mr. President, 1 year after its formation, the Syrian transitional government is resolutely restoring the country's place on the global stage and making every effort to revive its economy. The consolidation of Syria's internal stability, alongside efforts to shield the country from the looming threats arising from regional tensions, will remain essential to sustain future progress. Continued and increased international support is needed to assist Syria on its path towards recovery and development. Against this backdrop, I would like to underline the following points. First, regional peace and security are essential for the reconstruction process in Syria to take place. In this regard, we welcome the deepening relations between Syria and Lebanon, which are evolving beyond cooperation in the field of border security
to include economic cooperation, energy and transport. The recent visit of Lebanon's Prime Minister to Damascus is an encouraging sign of the normalization of neighborly relations. In a broader geographical context, we support strengthening the relations between the European Union and Syria that were relaunched this week through the first high-level political dialogue and earlier in April with President Sharar participation in the informal meeting of the European Council. The full resumption of the EU-Syria cooperation agreements and further lifting of sectoral sanctions will create new avenues for engagement and will contribute to an inclusive Syrian-led transition. The situation in the Syrian Golan remains concerning, and we insist that the Security Council resolutions and the 1974 disengagement agreement must be implemented. And we welcome the US mediation efforts aimed at reaching mutually acceptable security arrangements and call on both Israel and Syria to engage in them. Second, further steps are necessary to advance Syria's political transition, promote inclusive governance, and ensure the effective work of judicial mechanisms. And we look forward to the People's Assembly beginning its work once members from the northeastern governorates have been elected and the remaining members appointed by presidents. We expect the Syrian transitional authorities to prioritize the meaningful participation of women and representation of all ethnic and religious communities in the legislative body. We recognize the progress in advancing traditional justice. The ongoing arrests and trials of the former Assad regime officials involved in the violent repression of Syrians during the revolution and the decade after mark the beginning of an important chapter in national reconciliation. A comprehensive and transparent due process must be provided to assure the Syrian population that accountability and the rule of law are at the core of the new Syria. Third, it is essential that the transitional government takes concrete steps to embed the women, peace and security agenda into national legislation and transitional justice efforts. The inclusion of provisions guaranteeing women's rights in the 2025 Constitutional Declaration provides an important foundation that should guide the development of future constitutional documents. Legislative reforms are needed to eliminate legal discrimination against women. During the years of revolution, more than 11,500 incidents of sexual violence against women were documented, with reports indicating that the Assad regime was responsible for the majority of these violations. Justice delayed does not have to mean justice denied, and it is vital that survivors of conflict-related sexual violence finally gain access to credible investigations, reparations, and guarantees of non-repetition. Taking these steps would demonstrate a genuine commitment to accountability and to building a future in which women's rights and safety are fully protected. In this regard, we also encourage the Syrian authorities to advance the adoption of a national action plan for women, peace, security, which would provide a clear framework for the implementation of the agenda and ensure that commitments translate into measurable progress for women and girls. In conclusion, Mr. President, I would like to acknowledge the many positive steps taken in restoring Syria's international ties and improving the functioning of the state institutions and internal security. It will take time and further efforts to heal Syria's social fabric, deeply wounded by years of conflict and repressive rule. Continued international solidarity with a strong focus on recovery and reconstruction remains crucial in helping Syria move towards stability, dignity, and enduring peace, and Latvia remains committed to this. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Latvia for the statement, and I'll give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wish to thank Deputy Special Envoy Claudio Cordone and USG Tom Fletcher for briefing on the pressing matters at hand. In the midst of increased regional volatility, Syria's leadership is demonstrating and insulating the country from instability. We commend it for doing so. Against this backdrop, let me stress the following points. First, the protection and meaningful political participation of all Syrians, including women, and regardless of ethnicity and religion, must be ensured. This applies to political affairs, governance, administration, and the security sector. The Syrian government has repeatedly stated its willingness to live up to these expectations. We would welcome more tangible steps in this direction, making sure that all ethnic and religious communities feel fully represented. Likewise, the delivery of credible transitional justice and accountability is a necessary complement in order for Syria's reconciliation and recovery to proceed on a solid foundation. Progress along this track with the recent trials and the apprehension of those accused of orchestrating the suffering of the Syrian people is crucial for healing the wounds of the past. We hope that justice delivered according to international standards and norms will bring much-needed closure and comfort to the Syrian people. Paying tribute to the victims of the Syrian civil war, we hope for catharsis. Alongside progress made, substantial work still lies ahead, as the latest tensions in a predominantly Greek Orthodox city indicated. Steps aimed at fostering cohesion, including the recognition of Kurdish identity, are welcome. Full implementation of the agreement between Damascus and the SDF must ensure, while all communities, including the Kurds, should see their rights protected in the country's legal system. Second, Syria will find that it has the good faith support of the international community as long as it progresses along a genuinely inclusive political transition. Earlier this week, the first EU-Syria high-level political dialogue took place in Brussels. Before this, Cyprus had hosted an informal summit between EU and regional leaders attended by President al-Shara. Both occasions indicate the mutual good faith invested by the international community and the Syrian leadership in a Syrian-led transitional process and the country's recovery. Albeit with clear expectations which Syria needs to live up to, be it on the protection of all Syrians regardless of background or the pursuing of good neighborly relations in full accordance with international law. In this vein, the recent visit of the Lebanese Prime Minister in Damascus and signs of a willingness to chart a new path in the Syrian-Lebanese relationship are most encouraging. We fully support the compelling vision of a Syria that is at peace with itself and its neighbors, and stress anew our full support for its sovereignty, territorial integrity and independence. Third, Mr. President, the briefing by USG Fletcher demonstrated once more the serious humanitarian needs in Syria following the devastation of the Syrian civil war, now in the midst of rising energy and food prices because of the war in Iran. With nearly 16 million people in need, the recent launch of the 2026 Humanitarian Peace and Response Plan underscores the urgency required. The protection of children must remain at the vanguard of our efforts. The situation in Al-Hol and Al-Roh camps remains deeply concerning as children face poor living conditions and serious risks of radicalization. Similarly, Syrian school children have lost far too many school days, hindered by attacks on education facilities and threatened by unexploded ordnance which render demining efforts crucial. Greece is examining ways to provide Syria with assistance on this front. In conclusion, Mr. President, Greece remains steadfast in support of a prosperous Syria where all Syrians feel genuinely represented and protected, worthy of the aspiration of its great people. The UN is a critical partner in this journey, which is why we continue to advocate for the timely relocation of the Special Envoy's office in Damascus. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of China.
各位同事，我感谢
Colleagues, I thank Deputy Special Envoy Claudia Cordone and Under-Secretary General Tom Fletcher for their briefings, and welcome the representatives of Syria, Turkey and Libya to today's meeting. Currently, tensions persist in the Middle East and are spreading and spilling over in a way that seriously imperils regional peace and stability. As an important country in the region, Syria faces the daunting task of national reconstruction after years of devastation, and for the people of Syria, who have endured untold suffering from the ravages of war, lasting peace cannot come soon enough. Given the current context, it is incumbent on the international community to help Syria preserve the largely stable situation in the country and prevent the regional conflict from expanding and spreading that may trigger even greater upheaval. In this regard, I would like to make 3 points. First, maintaining stability in Syria hinges on advancing an inclusive political transition. The international community widely expects Syria to eliminate armed conflicts, restore order across its territory, establish an inclusive governance framework, and respect and guarantee the equal rights of all communities through a political transition process. The Syrian political transition must be led by the Syrian people, and the future of Syria is to be determined by none other than its own people. We call on all parties in Syria to focus on the greater good of the people, show mutual tolerance, and resolve tensions and differences through extensive dialogue and consultation. The Syrian transitional government should continue to advance political dialogue to create such conditions that will eventually bring about national reconciliation. Second, the key to keeping Syria stable is rooting out the scourge of terrorism. While the overall level of violence in the country has come down, the security situation remains fragile. The terrorist groups entrenched in Syria frequently cause trouble, seriously threatening peace and security both in Syria and the region. There is a high degree of convergence at this Council on Syria-related counter-terrorism. That is, Syria must not become a safe haven for terrorists. The Syrian transitional government has made a solemn commitment that Syria will not pose a threat to any country. We call on the Syrian transitional government to fulfill its international obligations, translate its political commitments into concrete policies and actions, and take all effective measures necessary to combat with a firm hand all international terrorist groups listed by the Security Council, including the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, or ETIM. Third, maintaining stability in Syria requires ensuring adequate resourcing as a crucial safeguard. Given its weak economic fundamentals, Syria faces a huge backlog of humanitarian needs and daunting challenges to its sustainable development. The UN World Food Programme has decided to slash its emergency food aid to Syria, citing funding shortages rather than a decrease in demand. The international community must increase humanitarian and development assistance to Syria, ensuring the resettlement of refugees and timely assistance to those in need, while gradually restoring the country's economic activity so that every Syrian can live in dignity. Colleagues, the restoration of peace and development in Syria cannot be achieved without a stable external environment. The international community should uphold the UN Charter and the basic norms of international relations and support the maintenance of Syria's sovereignty, independence, unity and territorial integrity. The Golan Heights is internationally recognized as an occupied territory of Syria, and Israel should cease all military operations on Syria's soil and withdraw without delay from the territory of Syria. China remains committed to working with the international community in a constructive role to help Syria achieve security and development and to help restore peace and stability to the region as early as possible. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you on successfully managing the work of the Security Council for this month. I would also like to thank briefers, Mr. Claudio and Mr. Tom, for their valuable briefings and for their sincere efforts to support Syria and the Syrian people. Member states in the Security Council, I would like to thank you for your support during this session for New Syria. Mr. President, the Syrian people have heard names they used to whisper in fear. These names are today being called out in court. The path of transitional justice is moving forward as one of the pillars of New Syria. Public proceedings for a number of perpetrators of grave violations against Syrian men and women have begun. Syrians who continue to find the remains of their loved ones even as they try to rebuild, as we have heard a few days ago when they were trying to rebuild a school in Douma in rural Damascus. Colleagues, I will share with you today 5 aspects of progress in Syria and other areas during this month alone. First, 36 steps. This is the progress achieved by Syria in the freedom of the press indicator for 2026 as published by Reporters Without Borders. This is an increase that is the largest in the history of the indicator. Second, along the same lines, steps continue to rebuild national institutions. The Supreme Committee for People's Assembly elections has issued the final list for subcommittees in Al-Hasaka. This is an additional step on the path to rebuild political and institutional life in the country. Third, over 3.5 million people. This is the overall number of refugees and IDPs that returned to Syria amid efforts to close the file of internal displacement. Fourth, billions of dollars. This is the value of opportunities and investments that New Syria has started to open its doors to, clearly moving from recovery to strategic partnerships. The country has hosted the first UAE Syrian Investment Forum. Furthermore, the Maritime Exploration Project with Chevron and UCC has started the implementation phase. We also signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Total Energy, Qatar Energy, ConocoPhillips to explore Maritime Block 3 off the coast of Syria. We also launched a pilot for electronic payments through Visa and MasterCard to strengthen the integration of Syria in global economy. Fifth, ongoing UN and international partnerships. Recently, we have witnessed the resumption of the full implementation of the EU-Syrian Cooperation Agreement. Syria also continues to strengthen its cooperation with the UN and donors, and we have recently received a delegation including representatives from 23 donors in OCHA. Mr. President, in Arabic we say, things are known by their opposites. Unfortunately, this is the case with Israel. Every time we talk about recovery, Israel launches a new attack. Every time we talk about the protection of civilians, Syria attacks Syrians and their livelihoods. Every time we talk about stability, Israel, through its acts of aggression against Syria, proves that it is the biggest hurdle in front of achieving stability in Syria. Every time we reaffirm our commitment to diplomacy brokered by the US, and we thank them for their efforts, we see that Israel continues with its attacks. Every time we commit to international law and to 1974 agreement, Israel violates it. And after all this contradiction and all this clarity, the Syrian people asks, what will the world do? Mr. President, speaking of destabilization, Syria continues to face terrorist threats. 2 soldiers were killed and others were injured in an attack carried out by Daesh in rural Hasaka. The government also soiled the plan and dismantled the cell linked to Hezbollah that was planning assassination operations. In conclusion, President, in light of the achievements that were made, it is incumbent upon all of us to read things within the correct context, not to deny the difficulties here and there, albeit true, but to reject and to prevent these difficulties from overshadowing the picture, from obscuring the achievements that are equated to miracles. We draw strength from our achievements to address challenges. And today, as I address you, and as Syria has moved from tragedy to opportunity, New Syria is writing its story through its citizens, and we call on the world not to write our story for us, but to be a supportive partner in a justice that is achieved, in a stability that is strengthened, in a dignity that is respected, and in prosperity that is applied. Thank you, Mr. President.
I think representative of Syria for their statement, and I give the floor to representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to take U.S. Secretary and then the Special Envoy, Mr. Cordon, for detailed and informative briefings. It is really encouraging to note that Syria has remained among diseases affected by the current regional turmoil in our region. This demonstrates that since December 2004, Syria has been moving slowly but surely towards sustainable stability. In this context, despite Israel's destabilizing activities in Syria and in the region over the past year and a half, we commend Syrian authorities for maintaining a commitment to the non-ISIS support for engagement forces agreement. We reiterate our call on Israel to fully comply with that agreement without delay.
Welcome back. The United Nations Security Council, as we did see, had held a briefing session on the Middle East with a particular focus on Syria, and we will be ending this special coverage due to technical malfunctions. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.